Okay, well, I don't have any very pretty pictures. I usually like to have lots of them, but it's a boring, well, not a technical presentation, rather than boring, I suppose. This is just a very brief outline of what I'm going to go through. It's just comparing NGOs with multi-government involvement with wetlands conservation management, conflicts with intergovernmental agency involvement, just particularly in Australia. And I've got some case studies of some of these, which I'll be showing you briefly. And then a successful intergovernment workshop, which is fairly rare, where we discuss the outcomes of the issues with the Ramsar site in Bodley Bay in Sydney. And then just one image of some of our, one of our bird groups who are working very, very well with the National Parks and Wildlife Service to do some site management. So what we're basically doing, as the title here is, we're working with governments to manage critically important migratory shorebird network sites. Is there a lack of intergovernment cooperation? And the effectiveness of a conservation and management of wetlands varies greatly between countries along the East Asian-Australian Flyway, from Arctic breeding grounds through essential staging sites during migration to non-breeding grounds. Each stage of migratory shorebirds' life cycle presents different conservation management challenges, and management of these sites is generally carried out by either large non-government organisations or regional and or national government agencies, or a combination of these. Every country is different, and particularly in this flyway. So NGOs are some of the most effective waterbird species and habitat management that's carried out by large NGOs. Two extreme examples of these, and not from our flyway, are the well-funded and highly focused Royal Society of Protected Birds, formed in 1889, with a membership of 1.2 million. I think that's greater than the Audubon Society, isn't it, Rick? And the Audubon Society, which was formed in 1886. As with most NGOs, committed by staff and volunteers tend to be drivers leading to long-term job retention and ambitious outcomes. Oh, I'm going backwards, sorry. In contrast to it with NGOs, environmental issues are often not a high priority for governments. Government staff may be less committed and occupy relatively short-term positions in which promotions do not depend on either their input to environmental matters or outcomes they may have achieved. There may be also a lack of in-job training, which I've found specifically in Australia, many nature reserves in priority drivers such as species and habitat. Efforts can be even less productive due to largely the lack of intergovernment cooperation in the political world. I was setting up a couple of examples of these. Conflict of priorities and interests between agencies can result in serious failures to address environmental issues and thereby adversely affect of conservation outcomes. Australia is used as an example of issues relating to intergovernment conflicts in the conservation land management actions, whereas case studies in this paper are from New South Wales. So lessons learned are discussed and proposed solutions offered at the end of this presentation, if we have a few minutes. In Australia, practically all wetlands of conservation concern are managed by state and territory government agencies. Sadly, low priorities at the state and national levels of government in Australia is reflected on the ongoing cuts to funding. I don't know what the rest of the world's doing at the moment for the environment, reducing staff levels with a monotonous regularity and with practical impacts on the state of the environment. No wetlands of international importance or national importance are managed or funded by the Australian government. They take no part in that area at all. though nominations are put forward by this level of government as Flyway sites and Ramsar sites on behalf of state and territories at international forums. I just quickly look at something about how management can be carried out. And my first involvement as a volunteer was in the UK in 1960. And it was very primitive, but very effective, working with a very passionate warden, as they call these nature reserves in the UK. These show you different pictures of the work done by a wheelbarrow and a shovel and some planks of wood. Occasionally they were able to get a small bulldozer in to help to level the wetlands. This used to be flooded grasslands on the east coast of England, and that's all it was. And this was being returned into one of the most well-known nature reserves in the UK now, managing many species of waterbirds and very primitive methods with a tractor and they're carrying soil, putting old bags and such like it to keep out the weeds, putting then rocks there and then covering it with soil. And you can see down at the bottom right some of the ponds that were created. And the sluice gates were actually made from driftwood taken off the beaches. In those days, a lot of service timber was available if you were astute. So we made all these things by hand. The top left hand is an overall picture of what Bird Axel, the warden, called the scrape. And the scrape is a name that's been taken over now in Maipo, because he actually visited Maipo as part of his scholarship, Churchill scholarship many years ago. So he's fairly well known to other people. My other experience going to Australia is with New South Wales fisheries research, establishing nature reserves, and also working creating artificial fish habitats to increase productivity on reefs and such like. And then with the survey and research section of the National Parks and Wildlife Service, environmental unit with, and then with the environmental unit of the Sydney Water Department, restoring degraded habitats from previous constructed projects carried out by Sydney Water, including some very sensitive wetlands. After doing this with these different agencies, a lot of my colleagues were saying it's about time I did something to work generally as a consultant. So in 1992, I set up my own business, my own company with some very effective staff, and worked as a consultant, avian and wetlands ecologist. Now, the case one of the issues that we have in Sydney, or in Australia, but this is around Sydney, is the loss of extensive migratory shorebird breeding and feeding habitat, as well as little tern nesting sites in Botany Bay. These have really decreased over the years, and part of this is back in 1992 when the Federal Airports Corporation were doing an expansion to Sydney Airport and destroying a lot of shorebird habitat and little tern nesting sites. And a colleague and I from National Parks and Wildlife Service put in a proposal for restoring habitat for the little terns. And as I was a member of the Royal Australasian Ornithologists Union, I put another proposal in for the relocation of shorebird habitat. Both proposals total project cost $800,000, but were accepted by the Federal Airports Corporation. Both submissions included a concept drawing for stabilisation and enhancement of a large sand island recently formed. I'll show you a picture in a minute. As when a part of a sand spit was severed during large tides back in 1991, which provided areas of suitable habitat for migratory shorebirds and nesting little terns. proposal was to provide suitable habitats in the long term. Now, the problem is that the Maritime Services Board, who have jurisdiction for the whole of Botany Bay, which this site is set up, decided that they would carry out hydrological studies on how this island can be stabilised and carry out the required environmental impact studies needed for approval of the works, using, of course, engineering consultants with not a lot of avian consultants involved. But unfortunately, several attempts using engineering consultants were not able to satisfy requirements of environmental-based government agencies, including the New South Wales Department of Fisheries, due to the significant loss of seagrass beds by expanding the island over this, the critical habitat for fisheries, of course. So neither of the proponents, either myself or Dave Priddell, or other avian and wetlands ecologists were consulted during the investigation process to contribute to environmental solutions. The failure to secure approval of the necessary habitat stabilisation has resulted in the demise of the sand island, which is close to eroding over the sand shoals and lost into deep water. This is a picture of the sand spit back in 1984. The tip of the island, the sand spit broke away as an island, and this is the projected movement of the island from the Australian Littoral Society back in 1978, that the sand island formed by severe sand spit would then move in a westerly direction. And this prediction came into place in 1991. And so we can see this is where the island has broken away. By 2006, the island has moved down here. They tried some dredging here to do some works which made it worse. So this is now the main island with many hundreds of migratory shorebirds and big nesting site for little terns. And take a note of these are some shoals. And I predicted that this island will eventually come in across the shoals. And here are the shoals. And the island, and that's that dredged area, has moved towards the shoals, and I predict eventually would become part of the shoals and then dissipate into deep water. This is the situation now in 2018. The shoals are now becoming part of the, the island is now becoming the part of the islands. You can see it's really stretched out and has suffered a lot from wave action and currents, which we had predicted. So that was a total failure, and that last image there is as it is now, and I don't think the island would survive another couple of years. Now, the big thing is with that is that instead of the $800,000 to do the job in the first place, it would probably cost about $2–3 million to stabilise that island, which means it won't happen. So we've lost a huge amount of habitat and migratory shorebirds and nesting colonies in Botany Bay. So that's really lack of cooperation between government agencies there. This is a project that I was given by the Main Roads Department, who put a main road across quite a small but very important wetland, which had migratory shorebirds on it. And the contract was to find a suitable site, then design and construct an offset shorebirds habitat. And this was completed by a single contractor, in other words, my company.
Hey, Phil, can you wrap up, please? Your time is running out.
Ah, shit, thought I was going to say. Okay, this was then going to be, it was very successful. As we have, this is a undershot weir to keep out mangrove seeds. And but the Department of Planning decided to hand this over to a nature reserve who didn't follow the plan of management. And now that site I showed you before is this site, which is now a mangrove forest. not even the basics that people should understand about shorebird distances from mangroves was even taken into consideration there. And case 3 was actually a Ramsar site that's passing its limits of acceptable change. For once, we had a really good meeting, a workshop of all of these government agencies and a number of people that are involved. And this is the Ramsar site, including a fisheries reserve. And we do have some good cooperation between bird groups. This is a local bird group working with the Parks and Wildlife Service, managing a huge area of salt marsh, which had been overtaken by mangroves due to some changes in hydrology as a result of some dredging in the industrial dredging. So there's just a couple of discussion points which we don't have time for, but I think some things that we could think about for the Flyway. And my main thing is for Australia is looking at site manager networks where site managers are working together and understanding the whole case of principles involved in wetland management. And I think perhaps we could learn something from the Airwood Flyway, for instance, the training kit for wetland and protected area managers. And that's it. Thanks.